The soft hum of whispers traveled like wind through the plush silence of first class, barely audible at first, then undeniably present. Jaylen Carter, 13 years old and dressed in a neatly pressed charcoal suit, adjusted his navy tie for the 4th time since taking his seat. His fingers, still youthful but trained by habit, brushed the lapel with care. It was the same suit he had worn to his grandfather's memorial last autumn, and now it was slightly short at the cuffs. Yet Jaylen wore it with pride. He sat tall in seat 2A, trying to ignore the smirk curling on the lips of the nearby flight attendant. "Sweetheart," the woman said in a syrupy tone that made Jaylen's stomach knot, "are you sure you're meant to be in this section?" Her name tag read Linda, and her words dripped with condescension as she leaned over, clearly addressing a child she believed to be lost. "First class is for passengers with special boarding passes, you know," she added, as though explaining something to someone who couldn't possibly understand. Jaylen didn't flinch. He raised his eyes to meet hers, carrying the quiet resolve that his mother, Simone, had worked hard to instill in him. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 2A, he replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the ticket that confirmed what he already knew. He belonged here. Across the aisle, a man with silver hair glanced up from his copy of the Columbia Business Ledger. His eyes narrowed slightly as they scanned Jaylen's suit and youthful face. The cost of that seat, he silently calculated, exceeded what many made in a month. His lips twitched into a smirk. Linda took the ticket from Jaylen with the air of someone examining a suspicious document. Behind her, a younger male flight attendant with spiked hair, Todd, his badge red, let out a low chuckle. "Looks like someone's playing dress-up," Todd muttered, just loud enough for Jaylen to hear. A few seats over, an elderly woman in a cream shawl looked up. Her eyes, softened by decades of witnessing humanity in all its forms, met Jaylen's briefly. In her look, there was recognition, and maybe a wordless apology. After a long pause, Linda returned the ticket with a hint of hesitation. "Everything seems to be in order," she said reluctantly. "Will someone be joining you, young man?" The question hung heavy with implication. Surely a child like him couldn't be flying alone, not in first class. "My mother will be here in a moment. She's taking a call." Jaylen's voice was level, the storm inside him hidden behind a mask of composure. Across the aisle, the older businessman snapped his paper closed. "Kids got better manners than half the adults on this flight," he muttered. The cabin filled slowly with passengers, with the usual pre-flight shuffle and overhead bin negotiations. But Jaylen remained untouched by the bustle, cocooned in invisible scrutiny. In his lap rested a slim leather portfolio, a gift from his mother on his birthday last month. Inside was the presentation he'd be delivering at the National Youth Policy Forum in Columbia Heights, one of just 12 students selected from across the nation. The nerves that danced in his stomach were quieted only by a buzz from his phone. A text lit up the screen. "Mom, still on the call. Don't worry, I'll be there before takeoff. You okay?" He typed quickly. Jaylen, "Yeah, I'm good. Take your time." He wasn't good, but he knew his mother didn't need more stress. Not today, not with everything she was juggling in her high-stakes role. Outside the window, ground crews moved efficiently, lifting and loading bags into the aircraft's belly. Jaylen watched them for a moment, wondering what it might feel like to live a life where tasks were so direct, so clearly defined, so free of assumption. "Excuse me, is this 2B?" Jaylen looked up to see a tall, older black man with a salt and pepper beard and wise, weathered eyes. He wore a brown tweed jacket with leather elbow patches and carried a leather satchel faded from years of use. "Yes, sir," Jaylen answered, sitting a little straighter. The man settled in with the unhurried grace of someone entirely at ease in his skin. "Dr. Harold Benton," he introduced, extending a hand that spoke of age and experience. Jaylen Carter, the boy replied, gripping it firmly, just like his father had taught him. Strong handshake, Dr. Benton said with a warm smile. You headed to Columbia Heights? Yes, sir, for the National Youth Policy Forum. Recognition flickered in Dr. Benton's expression. Ah, the Sustainability Initiative. Impressive work. I read about the finalists in the Chronicle. Jaylen's posture eased a little. You've heard of it? I should have, Benton said, chuckling. I'm one of the judges. Dr. Benton's eyes crinkled with warmth. Heading to Columbia Heights, are you? Yes, sir, Jaylen nodded, for the National Youth Policy Forum. Something shifted in the older man's expression, recognition, maybe even pride. The Environmental Policy Challenge, he said. That's remarkable. I read about the finalists in the Civic Chronicle. It was the first moment since boarding that Jaylen felt the pressure in his chest loosen. You know about it? He asked, surprised. I should, Benton said with a smile. I'm one of the judges. Jaylen's eyebrows lifted in disbelief. But I'm not technically supposed to engage with participants before the evaluations, Benton added with a wink. Jaylen grinned. Well, I won't tell if you won't. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Linda, the flight attendant, returning to their row. Her tone, now sugary with formality, changed the moment she recognized the man seated next to Jaylen. Professor Benton, she said, her voice just shy of reverent. Always a pleasure to have you aboard. May I bring you your usual bourbon before takeoff? No need today, Linda, Dr. Benton said kindly, gesturing lightly toward Jaylen. I have some important preparation to focus on. His message was clear without needing to spell it out. Linda's smile faltered ever so slightly before recovering. Of course, she nodded, turning toward Jaylen with visible effort to smooth her expression. And for your companion? My fellow passenger, Benton corrected gently. Might appreciate an orange juice. That is, if you'd like one, Mr. Carter. The words, Mr. Carter, settled in Jaylen's chest like sunlight through fog. Being addressed with the same respect as any adult on the plane made something unfold inside him that he hadn't realized was clenched. Yes, please. Thank you, he said, his voice calm but sincere. As Linda moved away, stiffness evident in her posture, Dr. Benton leaned slightly toward Jaylen. You know, he said, lowering his voice in a conversational murmur, I was just about your age the first time I ever flew. 1973. And the world, well, it was different. He paused, thoughtful, though perhaps not as different as we like to think. Before Jaylen could respond, a quiet stir rose near the front of the cabin. Heads turned. She had arrived. Simone Carter moved through the narrow aisle with the calm self-assurance of a woman who had spent her life in rooms that told her, by glances or tone, that she didn't belong and had refused to be moved. Her slate-gray pantsuit echoed her son's, tailored with crisp precision. Her natural curls were gathered in an elegant twist that framed her cheekbones with intention, not vanity. At 42, she carried her presence like armor, earned and polished. I'm so sorry, sweetheart, she said as she reached their row, her hand resting on Jaylen's shoulder. That call took longer than expected. It's okay, Mom. I've been having a good conversation with Dr. Benton. Simone's gaze shifted to the man beside her son. Recognition flared instantly. Dr. Benton from Monroe State University? The very same, he replied, rising slightly from his seat, though these days I'm more of a professor emeritus. And you must be the formidable Simone Carter, he said, offering a warm smile. Your name carries weight in every environmental policy circle I've worked in. Simone's posture eased, her face lighting with genuine warmth. As does yours, she said. Your work on urban ecological reform shaped how I approached justice-centered environmental strategy from the beginning. Before they could continue, Linda returned, setting down a glass of orange juice with polite efficiency. But her eyes darted back and forth between mother and son now, noticing the shared cheekbones, the mirrored poise, the matching presence that made their connection unmistakable. "Mrs. Carter, welcome aboard," she said, her tone now carefully professional. "Can I get you anything before departure?" "Ms. Carter," Simone corrected gently. "And no, thank you. I have everything I need." The dismissal was poised and unmistakable, a graceful wall, impossible to climb. Linda retreated. Moments later, Todd, the younger male flight attendant, approached, his previous smugness now replaced with something far more cautious. "Ms. Carter," he said, leaning in a little too close, "the captain asked me to extend a personal welcome. He mentioned your assistance with the airline's sustainability guidelines." Simone's smile was tight and diplomatic. "Please thank the captain," she said coolly, "but it was simply part of my responsibility. The impact assessment applies to all transportation sectors under the new green standards." Todd nodded, too quickly. "Of course, if there's anything you need during the flight, just let us know." As he backed away, Dr. Benton arched an eyebrow and whispered just loud enough for Jaylen to hear. "Interesting how fast the winds can change when they realize who's who." Simone exhaled quietly, settling into the seat beside her son. "It never stops being exhausting," she murmured almost to herself. Jaylen glanced at her, wondering how many times she had fought these quiet battles, how many rooms she had entered where her worth had to be reproven. "How was boarding?" she asked gently. Jaylen hesitated. He didn't want to add weight to her day. It was fine. She looked at him with the knowing gaze only a mother has. "Just the usual," he admitted. "Nothing I couldn't handle." Dr. Benton leaned back slightly in his seat, his voice rich with both approval and understanding. "Your son was the perfect gentleman," he said. "You've raised a remarkable young man." Simone smiled, the pride in her voice unmistakable. "He came that way," she replied. "I'm just trying not to get in his way." "Doctor." Benton arched a brow, his tone thoughtful but tinged with irony. "Fascinating, isn't it? How fast the temperature shifts when they figure out who's who." "It never stops being exhausting," Simone Carter murmured, settling into her seat on the opposite side of her son. She turned to him. "How was the boarding process?" Jaylen hesitated, torn between shielding her from the truth or sharing it. It was fine. The words sat in the space between them, see-through and fragile. Simone gave him a knowing look, her expression softening. "Just the usual?" she asked gently. Jaylen nodded. "Nothing I couldn't handle." A silent exchange passed between Simone and Dr. Benton, a shared understanding only those who had lived through similar experiences could truly grasp. "Your son was the perfect gentleman," Benton offered, his voice rich with admiration. "You've raised an extraordinary young man." "He came into the world that way," Simone replied with a quiet pride. "I'm just trying not to get in his way." The plane's engines hummed to life as final boarding announcements echoed softly overhead. The safety demonstration began, but Jaylen's attention was drawn to the vibration of his phone in his pocket. He pulled it out discreetly and saw a message from his father. "Dad, go make us proud at the forum. Heading to the airport now. We'll see you tonight at the hotel. So proud of you, son." A smile crept onto Jaylen's face. Colonel Terrence Carter was en route from a military tech conference in Redwood City. With both parents in high-demand roles, travel as a trio was rare. This trip to Columbia Heights marked one of those rare moments of alignment. As the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, Dr. Benton turned toward Jaylen with curiosity in his eyes. "Tell me, Mr. Carter, what approach did you take in your proposal?" Jaylen straightened in his seat, the passion for his work pushing aside any lingering discomfort. "I focused on integrating renewable energy systems into under-resourced neighborhoods, creating environmental benefits while also generating sustainable jobs for the community." It's about addressing both environmental and economic justice at the same time. Dr. Benton nodded, visibly impressed. That's thinking at a systems level. He's been living and breathing this project for months, Simone added with a half laugh. Our dining room has basically become an operations center. Conversation flowed more easily now as the plane ascended into the clouds. The earlier tension in the air had slowly begun to dissolve. Across the aisle, the businessman, Franklin Ames, though Jaylen still didn't know his name, caught snatches of their conversation. His brow furrowed and something in his posture shifted. The way he looked at Jaylen now wasn't quite the same as before. Eventually, the plane leveled off and cabin service began. Linda, the flight attendant, approached their row with hesitant energy. Her confidence from earlier had faded, replaced by an awkward restraint. She served Dr. Benton first, then turned to Jaylen, handing him a glass of orange juice, and finally Simone. As she placed Simone's drink down, she lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "Ms. Carter," she said quietly, "I believe I may have been less than welcoming to your son when he boarded. I'd like to apologize." The words hung uncomfortably in the space between them, unfinished and searching for some kind of release. Simone studied her for a moment, measuring intention behind the apology. "It's not me you should be apologizing to," she said softly. Linda shifted her gaze to Jaylen, her shoulders drawn tight. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you earlier. It was wrong, unprofessional, and unfair." Jaylen felt the weight of his mother's gaze, not pressing him to speak, but gently reminding him of the lessons she'd taught him for moments just like this. "Thank you for saying that," he replied, his tone calm but clear. "I accept your apology." Before anyone could say more, Simone's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and frowned slightly. "I need to take this. It's work," she said, rising and walking toward the alcove near the lavatories where she could speak in peace. Linda quickly excused herself, her body language betraying her relief to escape the uncomfortable exchange. Dr. Benton turned back to Jaylen with a thoughtful look. "You handled that with grace," he said. Jaylen shrugged. "My mom always tells me, how you respond to ignorance says more about you than it does about them." "Wise woman," Benton replied, his eyes softening. "Though I imagine it takes real strength to apply that wisdom, especially when you're the one being hurt." Jaylen nodded slowly. "It gets easier with practice." The simple words held a quiet weight that made Benton's smile dim for a moment. "It shouldn't have to," he said gently. The conversation drifted then to easier topics. Jaylen shared his love for classical piano, and Dr. Benton lit up as he described his decades-old vinyl collection. They talked about music and stars, about symphonies and the sky, about the strange magic of sound and silence. By the time Simone returned to her seat 15 minutes later, the tension had lifted completely. Jaylen no longer felt like a boy in a too-small suit under a spotlight of judgment. He was just himself, and that was enough. A quiet, genuine camaraderie had begun to blossom between Jaylen and Dr. Benton, bridging the 6 decades between them with ease. The conversation had meandered from environmental policy to vinyl records, from climate strategy to Chopin. Just as Jaylen was about to ask about Benton's favorite composer, Jaylen Carter returned to her seat, tucking her phone into her blazer pocket. Her expression was composed, unreadable. But Jaylen knew that look. It was the one she wore when she was juggling political tension beneath the surface. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. "Just some last-minute changes to tomorrow's schedule," she said, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Nothing to worry about." Across the aisle, Franklin Ames, the silver-haired businessman, closed his laptop and leaned slightly toward their row. "Excuse me," he said, "but I couldn't help overhearing your earlier discussion on renewable energy implementation. I'm Franklin Ames with Stonebrook Capital. We've been exploring ways to diversify our holdings into more sustainable ventures." Simone's demeanor shifted without hesitation into the polished professionalism she wore like second skin. "Mr. Ames," she said smoothly, "your firm has notably steered clear of the green sector until quite recently." His brows lifted slightly, clearly surprised to be recognized. "We're late to the table," he admitted, "but we're serious about catching up. Perhaps we could exchange cards. I'd love to hear more about your work." Simone's smile remained pleasant, but her tone made the boundary unmistakable. "My work with the Federal Environmental Council is public record, Mr. Ames. All policies and assessments are readily accessible." She let the words settle, then added, "However, I'm sure my son would be happy to explain the financial implications of his proposal if you're genuinely interested in the future of sustainable investment." The subtle pivot wasn't lost on Ames. He turned his attention to Jaylen, now with a new degree of interest. "Is that so? What's your pitch, young man?" Jaylen felt a flicker of nerves rise in his chest, but then he remembered the long nights preparing, the hours practicing his delivery, the support of his family. He was ready. "Traditional models treat environmental projects like charitable causes," he began, voice steady. "Good PR, but bad for business. My proposal shows how renewable energy in underserved communities can generate triple returns: economic profit, environmental improvement, and community empowerment." Ames leaned in slightly, intrigued. "That's quite a value proposition. What's your projected return timeline?" 3 to 5 years to break even, Jaylen said confidently. "After that, returns accelerate as infrastructure costs stabilize and fossil energy prices climb." His confidence built with every word, passion replacing any sense of being evaluated. Dr. Benton observed the exchange with quiet approval, while Simone maintained a neutral expression, giving her son the space to own the moment. "I have a son about your age," Ames commented, his tone more casual, "though I think he's more into his gaming console than reshaping the world." "Different paths for different people," Jaylen replied diplomatically. "I just happened to grow up hearing about policy and sustainability around the dinner table." "Sounds like you had excellent teachers," Ames said, nodding toward Simone. "The best," Jaylen agreed. "Both my parents." Before the conversation could continue, Todd, the flight attendant, reappeared at their row. His earlier smirk was gone, replaced by a stiff professionalism. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice more subdued than before, "there's a secure call waiting for you in the cockpit. The captain asked me to escort you personally." Simone's face betrayed nothing, but Jaylen noticed the subtle straightening of her shoulders, a signal he recognized from years of watching her navigate unexpected turns. "Thank you," she replied. "I'll be right there." She gave Jaylen's shoulder a reassuring squeeze as she rose. "I won't be long." Jaylen nodded silently, watching her disappear toward the front of the cabin, a place passengers almost never entered in today's world. He looked to Dr. Benton, who raised one eyebrow, mirroring Jaylen's quiet curiosity. "Your mom must be more important than she lets on," Ames mused, his tone half serious. "She just does her job," Jaylen said plainly, loyalty grounding his voice. Sensing the need to shift the mood, Dr. Benton turned to Jaylen with an easy smile. "So tell me more about your piano playing. Classical preference, or do you lean toward more modern compositions?" Their conversation picked up naturally, dancing from Beethoven to Rachmaninoff to jazz improvisations. Yet Jaylen found himself glancing toward the front of the plane every few minutes, wondering what kind of phone call required cockpit-level priority. Across the aisle, the woman in the cream shawl, the one who had offered a quiet look of compassion during boarding, leaned slightly toward Jaylen. "Your mother," she said gently, "reminds me of someone I once worked with at the State Department. Same stillness, same quiet authority. Jaylen met her gaze. He didn't speak, but the pride that rose in his chest spoke volumes. Before Jaylen could answer the woman across the aisle, Simone Carter returned. Her stride was calm, her expression composed, even as eyes across the cabin followed her with growing curiosity. Linda, suddenly brimming with forced politeness, rushed ahead of her to straighten Simone's napkin and refill her water glass. Her movements carried an air of servitude that bordered on overcompensation. "Everything okay?" Jaylen asked as his mother resettled into her seat. "Everything's fine," she replied, her voice smooth, though her eyes held a flicker of something distant, something unreadable. Just some updates to the landing schedule. "Doctor." Benton studied her with quiet attention, but he asked no questions. The respect he held for her included honoring the boundaries she clearly set. The flight continued on. Lunch was served, and their conversation drifted between topics. Jaylen's upcoming presentation, Dr. Benton's recent work on linking environmental policy with social equity, and how meaningful change often began with uncomfortable conversations. Nearly an hour passed when Todd approached their row again, leaning in discreetly. "Ms. Carter, sorry to disturb you again," he said in a lowered tone. "There's another call. The captain thought you might prefer to take it here at your seat this time." Simone nodded. "Thank you." As Todd handed over the aircraft phone, Jaylen noticed Linda hovering nearby, trying and failing to mask her interest behind the guise of attentiveness. Other passengers had begun watching too, their curiosity now less subtle. "This is Carter," Simone said into the receiver, her voice returning effortlessly to the crisp professionalism she wore so well. A beat passed. "Yes, Mr. President, I understand the urgency." A visible ripple spread through the cabin. Todd nearly dropped the coffee pot he was holding. Linda's eyes widened, her carefully styled demeanor cracking for the first time. Across the aisle, Franklin Ames sat up straighter, the interest on his face now sharpened into something else entirely. Jaylen watched the transformation unfold with familiar weariness and a trace of pride. It wasn't the first time he'd seen it, the stark shift in people's behavior once they learned who his mother truly was. Simone Carter wasn't just another well-dressed passenger. She was Deputy Director of the Federal Environmental Council and one of the President's most trusted advisors on climate policy. Her influence in Columbia Heights extended deep into legislative circles and policy rooms that shaped the nation's future. "Yes, sir," Simone continued, as though unaware of the stir she was causing. "I've reviewed the preliminary data. I believe we can move forward with the announcement, but we should lead with proactive messaging on the economic impact rather than a defensive response." Across the aisle, the woman in the cream shawl, who had offered Jaylen a knowing look during boarding, smiled faintly. "Thought so," she murmured to Jaylen. "I worked at urban affairs for 3 decades. You learned to spot the real power in the room." Simone wrapped up the call with a composed, "I'll see you at the briefing tomorrow morning, Mr. President," and passed the phone back to Todd, whose movements had grown noticeably cautious. The mood in the cabin shifted entirely. Where earlier there had been skepticism and subtle derision, now there was flattery and overcorrection. Linda returned to their row with drinks no one had requested. Franklin Ames' gaze had become unmistakably calculating, an opportunist sizing up the unexpected gold mine that had just revealed itself in the seat across from him. Dr. Benton let out a quiet chuckle. And just like that, the weather shifts. "It always does," Simone replied, a wry smile on her lips. Her voice held the knowing fatigue of someone who had seen too many faces change with the tide of perceived status. Jaylen had witnessed it often. The instant someone discovered his mother's title, their condescension evaporated, replaced with deference, admiration, or sometimes opportunism. He never quite got used to it. "It's weird," he whispered so only she could hear, "the way they treat us. How fast it changes when they figure out who you are." Simone was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the window before returning to him. "It bothers me," she admitted finally, "but I've learned to use it." Jaylen tilted his head slightly. "Use it how?" "When people change the way they treat you after learning who you are," she said, "they're giving you valuable information about themselves." She looked him in the eyes, her voice steady but gentle. "You can use that information to decide who's worth your time and who isn't, who might be open to change and who never was." To recognize who might be reached with the right approach, Simone Carter continued, and who's already a lost cause. She looked at her son, her expression softening. It's not fair, it's not right, but learning how to navigate it. That's a skill worth having. Their conversation paused as Linda returned once again, this time holding a chilled bottle wrapped in a napkin. "Compliments of the captain," she said with a bright smile. "A little champagne for you both?" Simone accepted the gesture with her usual grace. "Please thank the captain, but I don't drink while working," she said evenly. "And my son is 13. Linda's smile tightened, faltered for a second. "Of course. How thoughtless of me. Perhaps sparkling water instead?" "That would be lovely," Simone replied with practiced warmth, watching the woman retreat quickly down the aisle. Dr. Benton leaned in slightly. "You managed that dance beautifully," he said, the correction without the confrontation. Simone gave a soft chuckle. "It's taken years of practice. Some days I do it better than others." Todd passed by again, noticeably slowing as he approached Jaylen. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" he asked, the "sir" emphasized with theatrical politeness. Jaylen looked up, not flinching. "I'm good, thank you," he said calmly, offering nothing more. As Todd moved on, Jaylen could feel his mother's eyes on him, half proud, half aching. "You shouldn't have to be this composed at 13, she said quietly. Jaylen gave her a small smile. "I learned from the best." Before they could say more, Franklin Ames cleared his throat gently from across the aisle. "Ms. Carter, I hope you'll forgive the interruption, but I was wondering if I might get your thoughts on the upcoming carbon credit regulations. Some of our investors have concerns about the implementation timeline." Simone's expression didn't shift. Her voice was calm, direct. "Mr. Ames, I'm currently en route to support my son at an important academic event, but I'd be happy to direct you to the appropriate contacts at the Federal Environmental Council once we land." The boundary was unmistakable, firm, professional, and polite. Ames blinked, clearly not used to having his overtures deflected so succinctly. "Of course, family comes first." "I respect that." Jaylen caught Dr. Benton's eye. The professor gave him a subtle wink. There was something immensely satisfying in watching his mother navigate these conversations, not by raising her voice or demanding respect, but by commanding it without trying. The remainder of the flight passed in relative quiet. Jaylen reviewed his notes, flipping through his neatly prepared presentation. Across the row, Simone occasionally responded to work texts with tightly furrowed brows. Beside them, Dr. Benton had dozed off with a book about jazz open on his lap, reading glasses sliding toward the end of his nose. Then came the soft chime, and the captain's voice overhead. They had begun their descent into Columbia Heights. Jaylen's stomach fluttered. The moment was almost here. Sensing his nerves, Simone set her portfolio aside and turned toward him fully. "Feeling nervous?" Jaylen nodded. "A little? There are going to be a lot of important people there." "Important is just perspective," she said. "Remember what Dad always says?" Jaylen smiled, finishing the phrase with her. "Everyone puts their pants on one leg at a time." "Exactly. And you know your material. You've done the work. Now you just have to share it." "Doctor." Benton stirred, adjusting his glasses with a sleepy smile. "If I may," he said, "a bit of unsolicited advice from an old professor." Judges will be looking for more than just data. They want to feel why it matters to you. Don't be afraid to let that show." Jaylen nodded slowly. "Thanks, Dr. Benton." Outside the window, the capital city came into view, its skyline defined by clean geometry and symbols of power. Through breaks in the clouds, the white stone columns and marble monuments reached upward, declaring permanence. Somewhere down there, decisions were being made that would shape the world Jaylen was preparing to inherit, decisions his mother influenced every day. "Mom," he asked quietly, "do you think what I'm doing really matters? I mean, it's just a student competition." Simone turned to him, serious and still. "Every major movement in history began with someone caring enough to take the first step," she said. "Your generation is going to face environmental challenges we're only beginning to understand. And the work you're doing now, learning how to research, how to advocate, how to lead, that's how you get ready to make a real difference when your moment comes." Dr. Benton nodded in agreement, his voice quiet but strong. "And sometimes, young man, the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept the limitations others try to place on you." Jaylen didn't answer right away, but he looked out the window with new steadiness, the horizon inching closer. "This competition already matters," Dr. Benton had said, "regardless of the outcome." As the plane touched down with a soft bump and taxied toward the terminal, the moment lingered in Jaylen's mind like a steady heartbeat. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the cabin buzzed with the usual flurry. Passengers stretching, bags rustling, seat backs clicking upright. Just then, Linda returned to their row, her tone now fully deferential. "Ms. Carter, the captain has arranged for priority deplaning for you and your family," she said with a practiced smile. "We can escort you forward whenever you're ready." Simone glanced at Jaylen, a quiet question in her eyes. He gave her the faintest nod. Being allowed to exit the plane first might have seemed like a small thing, but both of them understood the deeper shift it represented, a reflection of how perceptions had changed from boarding to landing. "Thank you, Linda," Simone replied, gathering her briefcase and coat. "That's very kind of the captain." As they stood, Dr. Benton leaned toward Jaylen and extended a hand once more. "Mr. Carter, it has been a genuine pleasure meeting you. I look forward to hearing your presentation tomorrow, though of course I'll have to keep my judging hat on." Jaylen grinned. "Thank you, Dr. Benton. I've appreciated the conversation more than I can say." Then the professor turned to Simone. "What you're doing at the council, giving these young minds a shot at shaping a livable future, it matters deeply. Thank you for your work." Coming from him, it carried weight. Simone smiled warmly. "That means a great deal, Dr. Benton. Your legacy laid the groundwork for so much of what we're trying to move forward now." As they began walking toward the front of the cabin, Jaylen noticed Todd whispering to another flight attendant. Their eyes followed Simone, no longer skeptical or dismissive, but attentive, respectful, the same respect every passenger should receive, regardless of their connections. Captain Ellison stood waiting near the aircraft door, uniform crisp, handshake firm. "Ms. Carter, it was an honor to have you aboard," he said. "If you'd pass along our support to the administration, we're behind the climate initiatives, despite what some louder voices in the industry might suggest." "I appreciate that, Captain," Simone replied, her tone both diplomatic and sincere. "Safe travels for the rest of your day." They stepped into the jet bridge. The air had shifted, warmer, closer. Jaylen's phone vibrated in his pocket. "Dad, just landed. Driver's waiting near baggage claim. Can't wait to hear how the flight was." Jaylen smiled, already imagining how he'd tell the story. Not just about the shift in tone from the flight crew, but about meeting Dr. Benton and how, unexpectedly, he'd been given space to practice defending his ideas in a real-world setting. His father, Colonel Terrence Carter, cybersecurity expert and full colonel in the Air Force, would appreciate the irony. He'd face the same adjustments in tone from strangers once they learned his title. Inside the terminal, the familiar chaos of travel surrounded them. Children clutched teddy bears. Suits rolled briefcases over tile. Couples reunited with long embraces. As they moved through the concourse, Jaylen noticed someone approaching quickly from behind. It was Linda. Her polished demeanor was gone, replaced by something much more human. "Ms. Carter, I wanted to say something." They stopped. She looked not at Simone, but directly at Jaylen, her voice quieter now. "The way I treated you when you boarded, it was inexcusable. I made assumptions, and it doesn't really matter what they were based on. They were wrong. I'm truly sorry." There was something raw in her apology that had been absent earlier, a humility that made it feel real, not rehearsed. Simone studied her for a moment, then turned to her son, allowing him to lead. Jaylen paused, thoughtful. "We all have biases," he said carefully. "What matters is recognizing them, and doing better next time." Relief flooded Linda's face. "You're incredibly mature for your age," she said, blinking quickly. "Thank you for your grace." She hesitated, then added, "And good luck with your presentation." "Thank you," Jaylen replied, and despite their rocky start, he meant it. As she walked away, Simone placed a hand on Jaylen's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "That was generous of you," she said softly. Jaylen gave her a sidelong smile. "You always say, 'Holding grudges takes energy I need for more important things.'" And with that, they kept walking, toward baggage claim, toward their waiting ride, toward what came next. They continued through the terminal, weaving between travelers and luggage carts on their way to baggage claim, where Colonel Terrence Carter was waiting. As they walked, Simone's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then turned it toward Jaylen with a small, amused smile. "White House calling," it read. She sighed, half serious, half smiling. "Duty calls." Answering, her voice shifted effortlessly into polished professionalism. Carter speaking. Jaylen watched her expression change slightly as she listened, her eyebrows lifting in surprise, her mouth curving into something between pride and curiosity. "Yes, sir. We've just landed," she said. "That's very kind of you, but not necessary." "I understand." Then she turned toward Jaylen, phone extended. "He'd like to speak with you." Jaylen froze for a second, his mind struggling to match the words with the moment. "The president?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Simone nodded calmly. With hands only slightly shaking, Jaylen took the phone. "Hello?" "Jaylen," came the warm, familiar voice, one he'd only ever heard through screens, now speaking directly to him. "I hear you've got something big lined up at the National Youth Forum tomorrow." "Yes, sir," Jaylen replied, his voice steadier than he expected. "I'm presenting a proposal on renewable energy access in underserved communities." "Well, your mother tells me it's more than just a proposal. It's visionary. That's the kind of thinking we need. Grounded, local, real." "Thank you, Mr. President," Jaylen said, heart still racing. "I'm just trying to solve problems I see in my own neighborhood. That's exactly why your voice matters. We need solutions rooted in lived experience, not just spreadsheets." The president paused for a moment, then continued. "I know you'll be busy with the competition, but if you have time while you're in town, I'd like you to stop by the Oval Office. We're developing a new urban sustainability initiative, and your perspective could help shape it." Jaylen caught Simone's eye, his face somewhere between awe and disbelief. "I'd be honored, sir." "Excellent. Your mother knows how to get it arranged. And good luck tomorrow, though from what I hear, you won't need it." Jaylen handed the phone back to Simone, who exchanged a few final words with the president before ending the call. Jaylen stood still for a moment, the weight of what just happened pressing gently into his chest, equal parts pride and something heavier. Something deeper. "How are you doing?" Simone asked as they resumed walking. He didn't answer right away. Then, "It's just strange." Strange how? Jaylen looked down at his shoes as they moved. How I can be ignored 1 minute and then asked for my opinion by the president the next, when nothing about me changed. Simone nodded thoughtfully. "That's the world we're navigating, sweetheart." She looked over at him. "But never forget, your value didn't change. It was always there, whether they saw it or not." As they rounded a corner near baggage claim, Jaylen spotted a familiar figure standing tall among the crowd. Colonel Carter, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and effortlessly composed even out of uniform. His face lit up as soon as he saw them. "There they are, my favorite people." He wrapped them both in a firm embrace, the kind that said, "I've missed you without words. How was the flight?" Jaylen and Simone exchanged a look. "Educational," Jaylen replied with a crooked smile. "In ways I didn't expect." "Those are the best kinds of lessons," his father said, placing a steady arm around his son's shoulders as they made their way toward the exit. "Now, tell me everything, and don't skip a single detail." As they walked into the humid afternoon air of Columbia Heights, Jaylen began to tell the story, not just of flight attendants and assumptions, but of Dr. Benton's kindness, of Ames's shift in perspective, and of the phone call that still hadn't fully settled into reality. With every step, the weight of the experience lifted, transformed not into something heavy, but something valuable, something he could carry forward. Tomorrow, he would step into a room full of decision-makers and present his ideas. His voice would be heard. His ideas would be weighed on merit, not appearance. And whether he won or didn't, Jaylen knew something now with absolute certainty. He belonged. He had earned his seat at the table. As they neared the waiting car, he glanced back at the airport terminal, a place of hellos and goodbyes, of transitions and temporary intersections. Somewhere behind those glass doors, Linda and Todd were likely preparing the next flight. Maybe with a slightly broader perspective than they had this morning. Dr. Benton would be collecting his luggage, preparing to don his judge's cap for the forum. And Franklin Ames, who had started the day full of quiet assumptions, might just be reconsidering how Stonebrook Capital viewed sustainability. They were just small shifts, but shifts nonetheless. Ripples, moving outward. The car door shut with a soft click behind him, and Jaylen Carter sank into the leather seat, the weight of the day giving way to a quiet certainty. His mother's environmental policies were shaping ecosystems for decades to come. His father's innovations in cybersecurity were protecting the nation's critical systems from threats no one could see. And now, Jaylen's own contribution, just beginning to take form, had its place among theirs. He didn't measure his worth by who questioned his presence. He measured it by what he brought to every room he entered. And tomorrow he would enter a new room, one where his voice, his research, and his vision for a fairer future would matter more than any first impression ever could. A room where merit, not assumption, would speak loudest. In the car, Colonel Carter listened attentively as Jaylen described the events of the flight. His jaw tightened in places, relaxed in others, shifting between quiet indignation, deep pride, and a kind of tired understanding only decades of similar experiences could teach. "So let me get this straight," he said, as the car moved through afternoon traffic in Columbia Heights. "They questioned whether you belonged in first class, until they figured out who your mother was?" Jaylen nodded. Simone added, "One of the attendants did offer a genuine apology, eventually." "It shouldn't take knowing someone's resume to treat them with basic human decency," the colonel said. His voice, though calm, carried the steel of moral clarity. "But I'm proud of how you handled it. That composure will serve you for the rest of your life." "Dr. Benton helped," Jaylen admitted. "Just having someone beside me who didn't doubt I belonged, it made a difference." "Sometimes that's all it takes," his father agreed. "Just one person in the room who sees you." He turned slightly, So, how about running through your presentation one more time at the hotel? I'll play the tough judge. Jaylen brightened. Yeah, I'd like that. Dr. Benton mentioned that they're looking for authenticity as much as facts, he added. Smart man, the colonel replied. Data's important, but what really persuades people is knowing why it matters to you. So, why does this matter to you? Jaylen thought for a moment. I guess. It started with Grandma's garden, he said. Back in South Iverson. She'd collect rainwater, make compost out of food scraps, reuse everything. People thought she was just being quirky, but she was surviving. She was building something good from almost nothing. Simone smiled, her eyes soft with the memory. She was way ahead of her time, she said. She understood how environmental care and community survival were connected, long before anyone in policy circles was willing to talk about it. And now, Colonel Carter said, pride blooming in his voice, her grandson is carrying that same knowledge into a national conversation. Full circle. The car turned onto a long boulevard where the presidential office loomed in the distance, its pillars and flags symbols of a power that had once seemed far away, unreachable for families like theirs. Now Simone Carter walked those halls regularly, advising on environmental justice with the same certainty she'd once carried into rooms that had underestimated her. She checked her phone again. He wasn't just being polite earlier, she said. The president's team sent over proposed meeting times for later this week. He wants your input, Jaylen. Seriously? Jaylen blinked. He actually wants my opinion? You're 13, Simone said, but you've lived closer to these issues than most people sitting in that cabinet room. Age isn't always the best measure of expertise. His father nodded. Your generation is going to inherit the outcomes of the choices made today. You should absolutely have a voice in shaping them. The car pulled up to a historic brick hotel a few blocks from the National Leadership Center where tomorrow's competition would be held. As they checked in and made their way to their suite, Jaylen felt something he couldn't quite name settle over his shoulders. It wasn't pressure, not exactly. It was responsibility and a quiet readiness. As evening settled over Columbia Heights, the glow from monuments and historic facades filled the skyline with a quiet dignity. From the hotel balcony, Jaylen Carter leaned on the railing, staring out into the warm dusk. Behind him, his parents were unpacking, his mother organizing folders on a desk, his father flipping through the room service menu. But Jaylen needed this pause. He wasn't just feeling the pressure of the competition. He was carrying something heavier. The weight of every person who had believed in him. Dr. Benton, his science teacher, Ms. Serrano, his grandmother whose lessons on composting and rainwater harvesting had first opened his eyes to sustainability. Tomorrow he would speak for them all. The fear of letting them down lived right alongside the fire that pushed him forward. A quiet knock on the balcony door pulled him back. Colonel Carter stepped outside, joining him with the relaxed confidence of someone who had spent his life in high-stakes situations. "Penny for your thoughts, son?" Jaylen smiled faintly. "Just thinking about tomorrow, about getting it right?" His father tilted his head slightly. "And what does right mean to you?" Jaylen answered slowly, the words forming as he spoke them, making the case clearly, getting people to take it seriously, representing everyone back home who's counting on me. Colonel Carter was quiet for a moment, considering the weight behind his son's voice. "Success isn't always what we imagine it is," he said finally. "Sometimes it's just showing up as your full self and telling the truth, even if you're the only one doing it." Jaylen glanced at him. "That's easy to say when you and Mom have already made it." His father chuckled. "You think we had it all figured out at your age?" He shook his head. "Your mother was the first in her family to attend college. I grew up where joining the military was the only real shot at stability. We weren't on some perfect path. We were just trying to make something out of what we were given." Jaylen looked at him, surprised. "But you both succeeded. "We're still succeeding," his father corrected, "still failing. Still learning, still trying again." He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "That's the part no one tells you. There's no finish line, no one point where it all clicks and you arrive. There's just the journey and the people you choose to walk it with." The words landed in Jaylen's chest with a comforting weight, reassuring, grounding. "Thanks, Dad." "Anytime." Colonel Carter checked his watch. "How about we order something from room service, then do one final run-through of your pitch? I'll play the doubter." Jaylen grinned. "Deal." They turned to head back inside when Jaylen's phone buzzed. He opened it and found a new email from an unfamiliar address, chibentonmonroestate.edu. Subject, "A quick note. Mr. Carter, it was a pleasure meeting you on our flight. While I must refrain from offering specific feedback as a judge, I'll share this general advice. The most compelling arguments are those that connect the head and the heart. Lead with data, but let your passion show too. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that true success lies not in the award, but in the positive change you're already sparking. The world needs voices like yours. With respect and optimism, Dr. Harold Benton Jaylen handed the phone to his father, who read it and nodded with appreciation. "Smart man, that Dr. Benton," the colonel said. "He sees what I see." Inside, Simone Carter was still arranging briefing folders on the desk. Even on family trips, her work with the council rarely paused for long. She looked up when they entered. "Everything good out there?" "Better than good," the colonel replied, resting a hand on Jaylen's shoulder. "He's ready." Simone studied her son for a beat, the way only a mother could. She saw the steadiness in his stance, the calm behind his eyes, the quiet steel under all the nervous energy. "Yes," she said with quiet confidence, "I believe he is." By the time they finished their final review, it was well past midnight. Jaylen's voice was hoarse from repetition, but his confidence had deepened with each run-through. What had begun as a solid presentation had transformed into something far more powerful, clear, precise, and deeply personal. He was no longer just reporting research. He was telling a story that carried urgency and heart. "I think you're ready," Simone said, gathering the marked-up pages from the table. "Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is your day." Later, brushing his teeth in the hotel bathroom, Jaylen caught his reflection in the mirror. Behind him, his new suit hung on the door, freshly pressed, tailored just for the competition. Unlike the too small one he'd worn on the flight, this one fit perfectly. But even so, he reminded himself that it wasn't the fabric or fit that mattered. The suit was a symbol, yes, but not the source of his worth. His value was in the work, the ideas, the lived experience that gave his voice meaning. What mattered couldn't be hemmed or stitched. Sleep came quickly, his exhaustion overtaking him. His dreams blurred between airplane cabins and applause, Dr. Benton's warm encouragement, and Linda's overdue apology. When morning arrived, it did so with the soft ping of his alarm. Jaylen rose, showered, and dressed with focused precision. His father helped him with his tie, straightening the knot until it was flawless. "Remember," said Colonel Carter, smoothing his son's collar, "you've already done the hard part. Now, just be yourself." "And remember to breathe," Simone added, adjusting his lapel with a half smile. "Oxygen is surprisingly helpful for brain function." Her gentle teasing made Jaylen laugh, just enough to shake off the nerves. The competition was being held at the Eastmont Institute for Civic Leadership, a stately neoclassical building with marble steps and columned halls. Its design whispered tradition and weight, making the significance of the day feel even more real. As they approached the entrance, Jaylen saw other finalists arriving with their families. They came from all across the country, different races, backgrounds, hometowns, but all sharing a common purpose: to make the future greener, fairer, more just. Inside the grand lobby, volunteers in matching polos manned the registration tables. Jaylen checked in and was handed his name badge and presentation schedule. His stomach fluttered, but there was also a quiet thrill. This was happening. Jaylen Carter? He turned to see a young woman in a Navy staff shirt approaching. "Yes," he replied. "I'm Alana, one of the program coordinators," she said warmly. "Dr. Benton asked me to let you know he's looking forward to your presentation." Jaylen blinked. "He did?" She nodded. "He doesn't usually single out contestants, just so you know." Jaylen smiled, careful with his words. "We met on the flight yesterday." "Well," she continued, handing him a folder, "presentations start in 30 minutes. You're fourth in the lineup. Perfect slot, in my opinion. Thank you." As Alana moved on to assist another finalist, Jaylen turned back to his parents. "Fourth. That gives me a little time to watch how it's done, but not too long to overthink it." "Perfect positioning," Colonel Carter said. "Right in the middle. Not the first to break the ice, not the last with pressure to impress. Strategically sound." They made their way into the assembly hall. Judges sat near the front. Contestants and their families filled the rows. The air buzzed with nervous energy and whispered coaching. Near the front, Jaylen spotted Dr. Benton, engaged in quiet conversation with another judge. His tweed blazer and silver beard were unmistakable. As Jaylen scanned the crowd, his eyes caught another familiar figure entering the room. Franklin Ames, from the flight. Dressed in an even more expensive-looking suit today, the businessman made direct eye contact and offered a small nod of recognition before slipping into a seat near the back. "Looks like you made quite the impression yesterday," Simone whispered. Jaylen nodded slowly. "I'm starting to understand what you meant about how quickly people change once they see your value." She said nothing, but her smile confirmed the lesson had landed. Just then, the program director stepped onto the stage and tapped the mic. "Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the National Youth Environmental Forum. Today, you'll hear from the next generation of thinkers and changemakers. Each finalist will have 10 minutes to present their proposal, followed by a brief Q&A with our judging panel. Presentations will be scored on innovation, practicality, clarity, and projected impact." The room hushed, all eyes shifting to the first presenter walking toward the podium. Jaylen exhaled slowly, steadying his breath, his heart already aligning with the rhythm of the moment. The first 3 presentations were strong. A girl from Minnesota spoke passionately about restoring natural wetlands. A boy from California introduced a wildfire prevention plan rooted in indigenous forest stewardship. A duo from Texas demonstrated a smart water-saving system designed to support sustainable agriculture. Then it was Jaylen's turn. As he walked toward the podium, a flash of doubt caught in his chest, brief, sharp, and overwhelming. He was about to speak in front of some of the most influential minds in environmental science and public policy, and he was 13. The judges' faces were unreadable. All except one, Dr. Benton, whose eyes met Jaylen's with the same quiet encouragement he'd shown on the plane. Jaylen adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and began. "My grandmother always said sustainability wasn't just about saving the planet. It was about making sure everyone could share in it." He paused, scanning the room. "I grew up in South Iverson, a place where the trash pickup was irregular, the air smelled different after rain, and nobody talked about solar panels because the power grid barely worked as it was." His voice gained strength as he continued. "My proposal focuses on equitable access to renewable energy in historically overlooked urban neighborhoods. It's not just about solar panels. It's about restoring dignity, creating jobs, and building infrastructure where it's long been denied." The slides behind him moved between graphs and maps to photos of the community garden his scout troop had built, of cracked sidewalks near a proposed solar installation, of neighbors smiling beside compost bins made from repurposed wood. The biggest flaw in many environmental initiatives is that they're designed for underserved communities instead of with them, he said. We have to change that. His plan integrated local leadership at every phase, from planning to rollout to maintenance. It wasn't charity, it was partnership, and it was scalable. From the corner of his eye, Jaylen noticed some of the judges leaning in now, no longer passive observers, but engaged listeners. Dr. Benton gave the subtlest of nods. When his 10 minutes were up, Jaylen felt like he'd only scratched the surface. But he kept his cool as the floor opened for questions. The judges were sharp. One challenged him on funding sources, another on projected ROI. Jaylen stood firm, answering with data where he had it and transparency where he didn't. He acknowledged uncertainties while holding the integrity of his vision. He wasn't just defending a pitch, he was advocating for a future. Then came the final question. It was from Dr. Benton himself. "Mr. Carter," he began, voice calm, "if your proposal were implemented, it would transfer real decision-making power to communities that have long been excluded from environmental planning. How would you respond to the likely resistance from traditional power structures that might hesitate or outright refuse to give up that control?" The room hushed. It was a direct question, and a deeply political one. Jaylen considered his answer carefully before speaking. "Resistance is a part of any meaningful change," he said. "But I believe this approach offers something to every stakeholder. For policymakers, it leads to better implementation and less pushback. For businesses, it opens the door to stable, long-term investments that have local support." He glanced at the crowd. "And for the communities themselves, it gives them solutions they actually want, not ones assumed on their behalf." He paused again, then added, "The real question isn't whether we can afford to share power, it's whether we can afford not to." A soft murmur moved through the audience. It wasn't applause, but something more respectful, a shift, an acknowledgement. Dr. Benton's face remained professional, but there was no mistaking the pride behind his eyes. As Jaylen returned to his seat, the tension in his shoulders began to ease. Colonel Carter gave his arm a supportive squeeze. Simone's smile said more than any words ever could. The remaining presenters took the stage, each impressive in their own right, addressing plastic alternatives, urban reforestation, and ocean cleanup technology. By the end, it was clear that the judges had a hard decision ahead. The program director returned to the microphone, announcing a 30-minute deliberation period and inviting everyone to enjoy refreshments in the adjoining reception space. Jaylen exhaled slowly. It was out of his hands now. But what he'd brought to that stage, that blend of conviction, clarity, and truth, was entirely his. In the reception area, the energy buzzed with conversation and congratulations. Platters of hors d'oeuvres floated by on silver trays, but Jaylen hardly noticed. He was still answering questions from two other contestants, both eager to learn more about his model of community-led implementation. One leaned in. "How'd you get the neighborhood on board with the solar farm proposal?" Before he could answer, a light tap on his shoulder made him turn. Franklin Ames stood behind him, hand extended. "That was quite impressive, young man," the businessman said. Jaylen shook his hand cautiously. "Thank you, Mr. Ames. You've given me a lot to think about regarding how our firm approaches urban sustainability," Ames continued. "If you're open to it, I'd like to explore piloting your approach in one of our developments, with fair compensation for your intellectual property, of course." Jaylen blinked, unsure how to respond. Before he had to, Colonel Carter appeared at his side, extending his own hand. Colonel Terrence Carter. "I believe you met my wife and son on the flight yesterday." Recognition flickered across Ames' face. "Ah, yes, of course. Colonel, a pleasure. You've spoken with my son, and, while we appreciate your interest, he's 13. Any business discussions would need to go through proper legal representation and consider his education as a top priority. "Absolutely," Ames said quickly. "My enthusiasm got ahead of my process. Here's my card. If and when you're ready to talk, I'd be happy to connect." As Ames departed, Jaylen turned to his father. "You think that's actually possible?" "It's possible," the colonel said, slipping the card into his pocket. "But whether it's advisable? That's a conversation for another day." He clapped a hand gently on his son's back. "Today is about what you just accomplished." A bell chimed, signaling everyone to return to the main assembly hall. Back in their seats, Jaylen felt an unexpected calm settle over him. The outcome somehow no longer defined the value of the journey he'd taken to get here. He thought of the months of research, the long evenings at the dining table, the moments of self-doubt, and the quiet victories that had prepared him for this stage. The program director stepped up to the microphone once more. "Before we announce our top honor," she said, "I want to thank all of our finalists. Your ideas and your courage give us hope for the future." She began listing honorable mentions, each project impressive, each student worthy. Then came the final moment. For our first place award, the director continued, which includes a $10,000 scholarship and an invitation to present at the upcoming summit on sustainable innovation. The judges have selected a breathless pause. Jaylen Carter for his integrated proposal on community-driven urban sustainability. Applause exploded. For a moment, Jaylen didn't move. It felt surreal. His mother gave his arm the gentlest nudge. Slowly, he stood. His legs wobbled, but his spirit soared. He walked toward the stage, heart thundering, and accepted the Crystal Award and the symbolic scholarship check with quiet grace. "Dr." Benton, standing among the judges, shook his hand with formal restraint but whispered, "Well earned, Mr. Carter, truly." The post-ceremony reception blurred by. Reporters asked for quotes. Contestants clapped him on the back. Photographers snapped photos. Through it all, Jaylen stayed composed, the way he'd practiced, the way life had taught him to be, but the steady grin on his face gave away the truth. He was proud. Later that evening, back at the hotel, the trophy sat on the coffee table, catching glimmers of lamplight. Jaylen stood in front of it, just staring. "How does it feel?" Colonel Carter asked, coming to stand beside him. "Good," Jaylen said softly, "but also kind of strange. Like I've been working toward this for so long, and now it's happened, and I'm not sure what's supposed to come next." His father nodded. "That's how most big milestones feel. The build-up is everything until it isn't. But this isn't an end. It's a beginning. It opens doors, invites conversations, and gives you a platform." Just then, Simone walked in, phone still in hand. "That was the president's scheduler," she said, her voice even but her eyes alight. "They've confirmed for tomorrow. 2 o'clock, 15 minutes in the presidential office." Jaylen blinked. "It's really happening?" She smiled. "It is, and from what I'm told, he's not just interested in hearing your ideas. He's considering incorporating parts of your proposal into the new National Sustainability Initiative." Jaylen's breath caught. Everything was changing. Fast. But for once, he didn't feel overwhelmed. He felt ready. From a smirking flight attendant to the presidential office in 48 hours, Colonel Carter said with a knowing grin, "Quite the journey." "Life tends to work like that," Simone replied, resting her hand on Jaylen's shoulder. "The same things that make some people underestimate you are exactly what make others recognize your value." Jaylen turned the crystal trophy in his hands, watching how the light danced across its surface. "I kind of wish Linda and Nathan could see this," he said softly. "Not to rub it in, just so they'd know." "Know what?" Simone asked gently. "That they were wrong," Jaylen replied. "That a suit doesn't make the man. But it doesn't disqualify him either. That first impressions don't tell the whole story. They might learn that lesson," the colonel said, "or they might not. But that's their journey. not yours. Simone's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression softening. It's from Dr. Benton. He sends his congratulations. And an invitation. He'd like you to speak to his environmental justice seminar at Monroe State next semester. Jaylen looked up, surprised and humbled. That kind of recognition, from someone he had come to admire so quickly, meant almost as much as the win itself. Tell him I'd be honored. Night fell softly over the city. They ordered dinner to the suite, a quiet celebration, and talked through the day's whirlwind. Between bites of pasta and glances at the award, the conversation shifted toward tomorrow's visit to the presidential office and the upcoming summit on sustainable innovation, where Jaylen would soon present his proposal to policymakers from around the country. Later, while his parents discussed logistics near the desk, Jaylen stepped onto the balcony once more. The city below shimmered with light, its rooftops and stone buildings glowing against the dark sky. In the distance, the Founder's Spire pierced the horizon, a symbol of both history and promise. Somewhere out there, decisions were being made, policies were being drafted, paths were being paved for futures not yet lived. Tomorrow, Jaylen Carter wouldn't just witness those conversations. He would join them, not as a guest, but as a voice that mattered. The realization struck him with equal parts awe and gravity. It wasn't just opportunity, it was responsibility. His phone buzzed, a message from his best friend back in South Iverson. Did you win? Jaylen smiled, thumbs flying. First place. Tell everyone I said hey. The simplicity of it grounded him, a reminder of where he'd come from, of who he was, beyond the podiums and panels. Tomorrow would bring new rooms to enter, new perceptions to navigate. But tonight he could just be 13, a kid in a hotel suite texting his best friend, trophy glinting beside him. He turned back to the skyline, to the memories that had shaped this moment. His grandmother's garden, where compost and rain barrels weren't policy. They were survival. The community center, where he'd nervously pitched his first proposal. The late nights spent researching, refining, and rehearsing. The moments of doubt, the quiet resilience. He thought of Linda and Nathan, of all the people who had questioned his place. But he also thought of Dr. Benton, of the president, of every person who saw him not just as a kid in a suit, but as someone with something valuable to say. The road ahead wasn't guaranteed, but it was open, and it was his to walk, not because of his parents' titles, but because of his voice, his vision, his purpose. Behind him, the suite door slid open. Colonel Carter stepped out, leaning casually on the railing. "Penny for your thoughts, again?" Jaylen turned with a smile. "Just thinking about tomorrow," he said, "and the day after that." The colonel gave a quiet nod. "Big days." "I'm ready," Jaylen said, not boasting, just stating what he now knew to be true. "I know you are." They stood in silence, father and son, watching the city below, a city of noise and history and transformation. Jaylen Carter, 13 years old in a suit that finally fit, stood on the edge of what came next, and he was ready to meet it. "Big days," Colonel Carter said, his voice low with meaning. Jaylen nodded. "But I'm ready for them." The words weren't spoken with bravado. They were quiet, steady, formed not from certainty, but from growth. From rising to meet the moment again and again until it no longer felt like rising at all. Just being. "I really am," he added. His father said nothing for a moment, just gave a slow, proud nod. They stood side by side on the balcony, father and son, looking out over the lights of Columbia Heights, the glow of the Founder's Spire, the quiet hum of a city built on decisions, some noble, some flawed. A city still writing its story. And as the breeze carried the warm night air across the skyline, Jaylen Carter knew with a certainty that lived deep in his chest. His story was just beginning. And what a story it would be!